Welcome to the inaugural run of a little channel I'm calling meremortal.dev or meremortaldev. We're going to use this channel just to go through some cool stuff that we can do, get up and running quickly, and really make some things together. The first thing I wanted to show is actually not so much an example of building something from scratch, let's get started by typing out the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and that kind of stuff. But just kind of taking a little bit of a theme that we've been seeing online in a lot of different places recently, which is, hey, an AI can build a front-end website. Isn't that cool? We won't need devs anymore for that. And I think the reality, of course, is that won't be true at all. Developers are still absolutely going to have a place in this world. But at the same time, what's really neat is you can kind of really get started quickly and build something in just a matter of minutes. I'm going to show you something that I built the other day, really going from zero to deploy in about 30 minutes, all said and done. And the scenario was this. I was sitting down at a coffee shop with my 7-year-old daughter. It's the first week of school here in New York City, and she's starting second grade. It's been a while since we've done some math homework, so we're sitting down, we're just trying to figure out, how to get started again. What were we doing last year? And just kind of get brush the dust off of our brains when it comes to how we talk about math and how we work on math homework. One thing I noticed is that in schools these days, the way math is taught is so different than the way I learned it. So for example, she got a word problem that was something to the effect of, Lily has 30 pots, and each pot she's going to plant in 10 seeds. How many seeds did she plant? And the kids, at least in my daughter's school, are learning, they know the word strategy, right? So they have these different strategies. Some of it really involves drawing rods of 10 and then counting them. And, obviously they'll eventually graduate from that, but that, if you're used to doing this kind of math, basic arithmetic, starting from that place feels a little tricky. And actually for a kid trying to count, 30 buckets of 10 things each, that's actually a lot of counting, right? You're counting by tens. And of course, under the hood, you might be screaming this at me already. This is multiplication, right? At its core. That's what they're working up towards. But what I learned was that, in the class, they're not using the word multiplication yet. So when I said, "Oh, you're doing multiplication," my daughter said, "Absolutely, we are not. That's not multiplication." And I think the reality was just that they're not using that word yet. So anyways, once we've kind of started brushing the dust off of how we can communicate in the words they're using in school to do some of these math concepts, I also wanted to give her a little bit of an extra, practice beyond what she would get in a regular math workbook. And, if we were doing this, I don't know, 5-10 years ago together, I probably would have just written out some stuff in her notebook, to give her some chance to solve stuff. But the reality is, my daughter, one, loves playing games, just like I did when I was that age, and still do to some extent. She's also been getting into coding. So I thought this would be an interesting time to take those concepts that I've been seeing people post on, I don't know, places like Twitter and LinkedIn, where people talk to an AI, it spits out a little bit of a user interface, and people are like, well, we don't need app developers anymore. Thought I'd give that a try and actually push it a little further, right? Getting a UI inside of an AI application is one thing, but that's not where I want to use that stuff, right? And honestly, when I handed my daughter the first pass of it, it felt like all the cruft of the AI application getting in the way made it a little more difficult, although she was already having fun with it. So that's where I really wanted to go from idea to deploy and see how fast I could do it and get something useful in her hands that wasn't distracting. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this bit here is just kind of go through and show you the chat history. Partially because I think sometimes getting a chance to see how other people talk to LLMs is interesting. The way that I do it is probably not the way you do it. you have your own patterns with it, as do I. And I like to take the opportunity to see how other folks are doing it. So this time around, I just want to expose to you like what I ended up doing. And then perhaps in another video, we might just try it from scratch and see if we end up with similar results. So we're going to start out with Anthropic's Claude. And we'll kind of dial it in across a couple of chats. If you're already looking at my tabs that are open here, you'll see kind of the flow I ended up going through. And then ultimately, we're going to take what we do with Claude and put it on a service called Val Town, where we can have something deployed and anyone in the world can access it in no time flat. And even over on that side, on Val Town, there is a large language model that you can talk to that actually makes deploying even easier. So let's just jump in. We'll have a look at what's kind of my history here in terms of talking to the chat AI. So really just kind of started out knowing that, generally I kind of like to warm the LLM up into the problem space. So I didn't want to get like too chatty about it. Plus I was literally sitting in a coffee shop with my daughter who is working on other math homework while I'm doing this. So just type in, give me a fun interactive way to learn multiplication by tens for a 7-year-old. It spits all of this stuff out. Man, these things really do love to talk. I really just wanted the code, but I actually usually default to Chat GPT, but I've been seeing so many good things about Claude that I wanted to use this as a project to kind of try it out and see how it goes. So what's really neat about this is there's a lot of text you can read here, but like in no time flat, the chat interface spits out a preview of the code. You can also look at the code itself and see that this is just a React component that it's building, all front end stuff, pretty basic from a web development standpoint. Yeah, I could build this. You could build this too, most likely. But the cool thing is that, why mess around with all the boilerplate for something so simple? And so this was already the basics of what we were doing, although not quite exactly where I wanted it to be for my daughter. So just kind of continue from there. This is a good start, but she's currently doing it in school with quote unquote rods of 10 blocks. Can you make something like that? Because again, I want to figure out a way where, they're currently, as I mentioned earlier, in school, they're not talking in terms of multiplication, which is kind of wild to me, but okay. Again, like I want to stick with the strategies that she's learning at school. So just throwing this up on the screen wouldn't really click with how she's learning it. So instead, having this I think is useful, but this really kind of connects back to like how they're learning it in their textbook. So already this is like a million times better, and she may or may not notice this part, but she'll definitely see this and get it. Oh, okay, 6 times 10, which is great. So you can see that again, I'm getting just a ton of text here that explains the game, and then even gives me some ideas about like how to improve upon it. So I handed it to her at this point, and basically I had to wrestle her away from it already. She was just super into it in a way that like in a math workbook, it's not necessarily as engaging for her. So anyways, once I finally got my phone back and I could start talking to Claude again, I wrote, she loves it, updated it so that it multiplies tens by 10 as well. So for an example, it'd be 30 times 10, 80 times 10, etc. So here we go. This code will do that, but I may have to refresh it a few times. Okay, so it gave me this 30 times 10, and I don't know, but like the visualization of this like didn't quite make sense to me. Each purple rod represents 10 blocks. I think like this instruction is also like not accurate. So you can see a little bit of AI-ishness going on here. I actually wanted to call this out to the AI and just be like, hey, so you gave me this, but for multiplying tens by 10, the visuals are misleading. Example in the screenshot where it looks like the answer would be 60. So fair enough. The AI agrees with me, as often the AIs seem to be trained to do. So hopefully I was right about that, but I was. So anyways, it revised it, and it did it in a way. Let's see if we can get one. Okay, so now you'll see a purple square represents 100. But then like, what is this, right? Like, I mean, if we're talking about at this point, again, for someone who just started second grade who's insisting they're not doing multiplication, well, I mean, coming up with this kind of stuff is just like completely unnecessary. So wanted to continue on and kind of talk about this. I actually just like found it in the source code. So again, you can click back over to the code, and there's this div right here. So basically all it's doing is saying is that if that number that we're multiplying times 10 is greater than 10, then it's going to show this formula. I don't know. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Like why did it decide that that's the boundary? And this is the part where it would start like showing a formula. Why did it want to start showing a formula? Who knows? But anyways, I just kind of went in and said like, hey, please omit this div. It's way too confusing for a 7-year-old, and honestly, just unnecessary. So once again, it agreed with me and apologized. Okay, thanks. And then go back in here, and if we can get another hundreds one to show up. There we go. So no more crazy formula, which is nice to see. So next up, I wanted to go and do some sound effects. Now, this is one of the things where I think it just kind of depends on maybe on the AI. I'm still not that used to working with Claude, so for me, this is like a relatively new one. But what I started to find is that, this is going to go on a totally different thread of thought for a while, right? We want to add sound effects to a game. So, if you're kind of thinking with your development hat on, like this is kind of something where, who knows, like if you divide, your own self up into multiple developers working on something, well, now you're handing this off to the audio engineering department, so to speak. It doesn't really have much to do with the main thread of conversation. And so I kind of just went with it for a second and said, hey, let's put a little celebration sound and like something that's not super harsh if you make a mistake, a muted plonk or something like that. So anyways, what Claude went and did was go and write the code for this. Let me see here. Somewhere in here, it starts to refer to, here we go, path to correct sound.mp3. Great. Except for that's obviously a placeholder, right? I'm sure it mentions that somewhere in the text. But that's not really what I want to do. So I think I tried running this before I went through and even looked at the code. So I just said, hey, I'm not hearing the sounds. But of course, it points out that, hey, I just put in placeholders. So one of the things, it starts to guide me on the idea that, I could put sound files on a server or a CDN, okay, which is already kind of overkill for something like this. I can't really do that easily from my phone anyways. So yeah, these are all proper solutions. Potentially they're valid solutions, but that's not quite what I want to do here. So I'm getting a lot of instructions. And at this point I'm like, all right, I can see we're going to go on a whole other thread here. I could just tell. So I said, go ahead and roll back to the previous version. And that's what it did. I mean, Claude loves to apologize, which is kind of wild. I don't feel bad, but I just like don't want the LLM to like come across this way to me. So I don't know. I may have to like put a custom instruction just to say like quit apologizing. But anyways, roll back to the previous version. So we could go, so I could go and think in a separate thread about sounds with the same LLM. So here we go. I came over here. At first I started thinking through, a little bit about like how maybe I could go to something like freesound.org. There's a lot of places like this where you can go online and then like, find chunks of audio and use those under, different open source licenses. I played around with that for a second, but honestly, again, like it kind of feels like overkill and a little bit more complication than I want for something that web audio API can handle with synthesis. So that's exactly what I wanted the LLM to come up with. So I just went and kind of asked it to play some sounds, and let's see if we can get it to play some sounds. This is my first stream on this channel, so I have no idea if you'll be able to hear it, but I won't focus too much on this, but just to give you some idea. Yeah, that's like weird and clicky, and kind of, I don't know, just an odd one. And this would be harder to hear, I think, quite honestly. So I didn't really want to go with that. For incorrect, I said, make it a quick double thump of the sound you well, I meant to say made. And then for correct, let's make it a little more joyful. Super hand wavy feedback, but if I were talking to a human, I might be a little more precise, but it felt like for an LLM, I just wanted to see what it would do. So then there was this, which is kind of just like an arpeggio up. And then that's a double thump, which was the right shape of the sound, but the wrong frequency. Again, like that would be completely inaudible on, say, like a phone's speaker. So, for correct, a little less of a dry sound. For incorrect, it's hard to hear, a mid frequency perhaps. Let's see what we got. So that's like being in a giant train station and listening to audio. I don't know, like a chime. Someone's about to make an announcement that you also won't really be able to understand. That's not what we want. And then I don't know what that was, but like also imagine those two are in the same game. Like, so I think that was my next feedback, was a little less reverb on correct, and then can you make these both sound like they belong in the same quiz game? And let's see what we got. Okay, so instead of the double thump, we got a little doom, but there's enough of like a meat on that one that it felt passable. And then I asked it, hey, great, so give me the audio code without the UI so I can plug it into another code base. Okay, so we kind of dialed in the audio, and again, you can imagine, right? Like if this was like higher stakes or something I really wanted to like, noodle around on, we'd dial in the audio a bit more than that, but for what I'm doing here, more than sufficient. So all this does is like come up with all the synthesis code for the web audio API, and it even provides some usage examples, which I think is neat because I can include that in my next message to the original LLM thread, and the LLM can not only infer from the code, but then actually see like literal examples written in prose. So that's what I did. I said, please use this code for the sounds, and just pasted in all that stuff. So, for that last little chunk, the nice thing is that at some point, you just don't want to distract the main LLM thread too much with something that's tangential. So I just went straight to this channel for web audio API sound effects, got what we needed, and then came back and said, okay, great, plug this into what we're doing here. And then I'm not sure at this point, it may have gotten pretty close. Right. So after that, there were a few times where I think, so let me click on this one real quick and I'll show you. So let's say that 10 times 10 and I go, okay, the answer's, 7 times 10 and the answer is 72. And then if I hit check, it says, oops, the correct answer is 70, try again. I mean, you're not trying to make this super hard, but like, what do we mean try again if I'm giving you the answer here? So I just said, please don't do that. And it stopped doing that and just says not quite, try again. So that went in there. For a moment, sound disappeared, but that might have been an iOS thing in Safari. Well, wait, who knows? Anyways, it may have been some kind of iOS thing, but it brought the sounds back. And then I asked it to support return or enter for the check button. And then I just kind of asked for recommendations. This is one of the great things about like working with an LLM is looking for white space in your own thoughts, right? Where are the gaps? What are some things that you could be doing that you're not even thinking about? And you'll recall that early on in the chat, Claude mentioned a few ways to make the game more interesting. I think it came up with ideas like you should have streaks or like, I don't know, like a top 20 player list or something like that. So it had a few pretty basic ideas. And I just wanted to see if it would come up with a few more things that I could do if I wanted to. And you'll see again, it came with streaks and bonus points, time challenges, visual rewards, character guide, difficulty levels, all this kind of stuff. I don't know that I took it up on any of these things, and I just said, hey, give me the full code base. And I think that's where we get into the deploy. Yep. So at that point, kind of got to a good spot in terms of how we want this game to work. So just to kind of show you a little bit of what it's doing, if it stops reloading. So we got 1 times 10 is 10. Woohoo. And then it'll do this, and this time I'm going to put 72. Oh man, that's not it, right? Because it's 80. And then I just kind of keep going and it tallies the score. This is super basic, but those of you that have kids or have spent much time with kids, like you, especially at that age, it seems like sometimes the most basic things are like the most engaging for some reason. It's the classic, you buy a toy and then the kid plays with the box for half the day. So even though this doesn't seem like much, I assure you, even before it got even to this level, it was already one of those things where she didn't want to stop playing it. So that was pretty great feeling. So what we did is ask for the entire code base, go ahead and grab all of this, and then I just clicked copy. And then I went over to the service called Val Town, which I'm absolutely loving recently. Val Town is a place you can go to kind of make scripts, HTTP endpoints that you can call via API, cron jobs. You can do stuff via email. This thing is like super crazy cool. I've been playing around with it in a lot of different ways. I'm trying to see, who knows, right? There might be some things that are or are not interesting here. I think here I was just looking for like random numbers and to see if I could import Lodash. Maybe at some point we'll go into depth on like what Val Town can do. Like, this is wildly cool in my opinion. But one of the things that it can do is it has this thing called Townie, which is another AI. And as I'm looking at it here, I'm seeing it's also talking to Claude 3.5 Sonnet. So like it's the same AI we were just talking to a second ago, but not on my Claude account. I guess it's on Val Town's account. So all I did was grab the code that I got from Claude AI, and I just said, render this React app, having forgotten to actually paste the code. So I canceled it and then pasted the code. And from there, it made what is known as a val on Val Town. So if I go to my own homepage of Val Town, you'll see that now I have this little thing. It's kind of like a GitHub gist, except it runs, right? So, again, like, this isn't just, why would I need an LLM to talk to about like rendering the code if I already have the code? Well, Val Town comes with like its own sort of, how would I say this? Like conventions for how to get stuff set up, right? Because, for example, like you're pulling in all of these things that you might normally grab from an npm, for example, but you instead you end up pulling them from something like an esm.sh or something like that, because you don't have a way to do npm installs. So there's little things like that, or ultimately like, how is this, as a serverless function being rendered? You get the export default async function server, blah, 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 that takes a web request and returns a promise in the form of a web response. So again, like, I could and have sat down and coded all of this stuff, but that's all boilerplate for a service called Val Town that, quite honestly, like if their AI can just do that for me, then fantastic. And it did. 0 edits required on this side of things. So obviously this is a simple web client application, nothing crazy going on here. So pretty easy for the LLM to handle. So now if you go to ashryan.io multiplicationgameapp.web.val.run, which is quite a mouthful, but again, like I'm sure you can put the stuff on custom domains if you wanted to. But anyways, all the code's deployed, sounds are there too, everything's working just as you would expect. And so now, as I mentioned earlier, my daughter playing this game inside of the Claude interface was fine, but clearly distracting, right? Not least of which because like you're dealing with on iOS, like different parts of the screen that you're pulling up and down, or, to, handle whether or not you're typing into the LLM or you're interacting with the rendered UI inside of the chat interface, and then a different keyboard pops up and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of a lot to deal with visually. So I just put this on here. And then after that, I went to this address on iOS, and I added a bookmark to my home screen, and now she can just play it. So anyways, the explanation of this might feel almost like longer than the amount of time I spent doing much with it, to be honest. The main thing was, the whole flow here was like, all right, I want to do something that is, gives her a bit of extra math practice. It's replicable, and we can kind of get it up and running in no time. Went and talked to a chatbot. It gave a passable UI in the beginning. I coached it into a place where the UI in the game was a bit better. worked with a different thread in an LLM to get some sounds going, and then put all of that together and threw it into a Val on Val Town, where I asked that Val to say, hey, I have this React code, render it as a Val. And it spit that out and created a new Val for me. And at that point, once you make it public, it's deployed and running. So I guess if a couple of things that end up being neat about something like this is, one, how fast you can go. But two, like, this makes it more interesting for, in this case, like the kid who's like the user, who isn't going to be greeted by the exact same questions over and over again. And we could continue to iterate on this as her math lessons change over the coming weeks. But also, I can just throw a URL in the direction of the parent chat for her classroom, and then they can all play with it too. So there's a lot of interesting things that we can get done. And one of the fun parts of this is that for something super basic, you'll notice we didn't really spend any time coding. Instead, we spent a lot of time having directions about how to code it, what to build, what the output should look like, and eventually it gets there. So does this eliminate developer jobs or anything like that? No, I don't think so, because this wouldn't have existed unless it was like super, fast to create it on the fly in less than 30 minutes, while an impatient 7-year-old is sitting there with you and having coffee and doing math homework. So this is just something that is newly possible, and that's really exciting. There's, as a front-end application for the devs here, that there's not a tremendous amount of depth in something like this. This is just a web component. But I think what's really neat is how it makes some of the basic day-to-day stuff that you might have wanted to do, but it seemed like, okay, that's going to take a day or two and it won't be worth it. Now you can just dream it up, ask for it, and you get it. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this first pass at it, and at some point maybe we'll sit down and actually just go through this flow together of like, let's build another little front end thing using some LLMs. I think one of the things I'd like to do is compare this to, say, like an OpenAI, for example. But yeah, my first experience with Claude in probably about 6 months was using this the other day, and it was just a tremendous success and a pleasure to use. So anyways, that's all we've got for this round. Hope somebody finds it useful, and feel free to get in touch. Thank you.